Hello, everyone. Welcome to the National Film Board of Canada's Black History Month panel discussion. My name is Selwyn Jacob, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I made my first film in Edmonton in 1984. It was called We Remember Amber Valley. It told the story of Black settlers from Oklahoma who had immigrated to Alberta between 1910 and 1912. A few years later, I produced and directed The Road Taken, a film about Black men who worked on the trains primarily as sleeping car porters, regardless of their education or their qualifications. I moved to Vancouver in 1996 to join the National Film Board as a cultural diversity producer. And when I retired in 2019, I had produced over 50 National Film Board films. Some of my titles included Mighty Jerome, Ninth Floor, Holy Angels, Because We Are Girls, and Now Is the Time. Over the years, I have participated in Black History Month celebrations by screening my own films or other NFB titles that were relevant to the Black History Month theme. So I'm extremely pleased to be moderating this panel on Black health and wellness, a topic that is so relevant to the Black community, but one that is seldom discussed in public. And now a little background about the NFB. The National Film Board of Canada is a public producer of content that reflects the diversity that makes up Canada, content made for all Canadians to experience. Collaboration is at the heart of what the NFB is all about. By working with Black creators, the NFB brings out unique narratives that the Canadians everywhere need to see more of. The organization amplifies the rich culture, experiences, and perspectives of Black communities across Canada, from Africville to Amber Valley, through stories that enrich our collective understanding as Canadians. And now, I would like to, at this point, I'd like to invite the Government Film Commissioner and Chairperson of the National Film Board, Claude Jolicoeur, to bring us greetings. Claude.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to all the filmmakers and to Selwyn for hosting today's conversation. Black History Month is an opportunity to remember the extraordinary contribution of Black Canadians in all areas through our history. These stories are being told thanks to the talent and vision of our creators. And all my thanks to the entire team and our many collaborators, the NFB team. At the NFB, we are committed to amplifying the diversity of Black experiences and perspectives every day of the year. To strengthen our efforts, last year in February, I introduced our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, along with commitments and objectives to help us become a more open and diverse organization. It's a vision of change for the NFB, which calls for us to eliminate systemic racism and unconscious bias across our organization. It's a call for us to better reflect the true face of Canada in our workforce by prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our hirings, with the creators that we work with and the stories that we tell. And a key part of this has been the creation of a new position at the NFB, Director, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Rachel Descostes is our new director, our first ever strategic diversity leader. She brings a strong background as a leader and change agent. We are privileged to have her with us to guide our vision. Please welcome Rachel Descostes. Rachel?
Thank you, Claude. Welcome, everyone. It's an honor to be sharing this space with you. Today, the NFB is bringing together Black creators to share experiences and perspectives, to explore the theme of this year's Black History Month, and to generate a broader discussion around race, activism, and the issues facing Black Canadians all year round. As part of Black History Month celebrations, the NFB is also releasing its first ever Black History Study Guide entitled Exploring Black Communities in Canada Through Film. The guide will be a great new tool to help students develop a deeper awareness of the different experiences of Black Canadians. As part of my work in making sure that we see more initiatives like this so that the NFB can be an agent of change. That's why I wanted to come here and help lead that change. The NFB is pleased to organize this panel about Black health and wellness as seen through the eyes of filmmakers. Thank you to all the filmmakers for taking part today, and thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Claude. And now, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. It's a pleasure of mine to be working with such renowned filmmakers who bring diverse stories from across the country. The first one would be Ho-Che Anderson. Then we have Janice Charlie, Tyler Simmonds, Michelle Stevenson. These are the people on the panelists. And as soon as we are all here, we will start the conversation. And now, the members of the panelists. First of all, I'd like to bring up Ho-Che Anderson. Ho-Che, can you talk about yourself and your project? A brief introduction on both levels.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ho-Che Anderson. I'm a, a Toronto-based filmmaker and cartoonist. I'm here today to talk a little bit about my project Governance, which was a project just discussing how we can kind of re-examine the effects of government on our lives and trying to map a more progressive way forward rather than the kind of more oppressive way that we've been governed over the last however many years. Trying to look for a more kind of progressive, more enlightened way forward. Yeah, so that's kind of the basis of the project. It was a minute or like a 2-minute long short film for the NFB, part of a larger project called The Big Reset, which we did, I think, last summer.
Thank you very much, Ho-Che. Janice.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and complete honor. I am a Toronto-based comedy writer and performer named Janice Charlie. Hi, hello. And I'm here to talk about my documentary short, I Am Gay, that was produced by the NFB in 2020 for the From Where I Am program. And that's the story of me and my family. And I had been out of my family home for a few years. So I decided in the midst of the pandemic to return and come out of the closet to each member of my immediate family live on camera. And the short doc follows the emotions and conversations that ensue. And I think we've come up with something both heartwarming, a little heart-wrenching, but overall endearing. And it was a pleasure to work on that project with the NFB. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Janice. Next up, Tyler Simmonds. Tyler?
Hey, I'm Tyler Simmonds. I'm a film director from Halifax, Nova Scotia, North Preston specifically. And yeah, I'm in the preliminary stages of my film currently. It's titled More Than Our Labels, and I'm going to touch on mental health in the Black community and within men's mental health specifically. And the power of vulnerability. Yeah, why it's unique and why we need to pay attention to it and why others need to pay attention to it.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Michelle.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to be meeting fellow filmmakers and the rest of the team at ONF, at the NFB. I am a Haitian Canadian filmmaker, born in Haiti, raised in the Eastern Townships, between the Eastern Townships and Montreal, currently based in Brooklyn, New York. I call myself sort of an agnostic, a platform agnostic filmmaker, doing virtual reality as well as flat-based or 2D-based filmmaking as well. My latest feature-length film is called Stateless, and I had the pleasure and honor to be collaborating with the NFB with some very strong women of color, Anita Lee and Leah Marin in Toronto, and we edited between Montreal and Toronto. And the film is about anti-Black, state-sanctioned anti-Black discrimination in the Dominican Republic against Dominicans of Haitian descent. And so I was hoping that the film be not only sort of a window into the expression of white supremacy in this place in the Caribbean, but also how it can be a mirror to our own communities and things that we can look at in our attempts to change behavior as well as systemic racism. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all. And as I said in my introduction, I think I am just fascinated with the diversity which exists within this panel here today. It is ironic that we are dealing with diversity, and within the bigger diversity, we have diversity among ourselves. So I'm really looking forward to your diverse take on some of these different topics. Now, regardless of how diverse we might be, one of the things that is common to all of us is the concept of representation. Representation in Canadian film and television. And the question I'd like to pose to start off this discussion is, how do you think your work adds to this discussion of diversity in the broader scheme of things? So I'll start off with Hoche. What's your take on that, Hoche?
How does my work add to the discussion of diversity?
Add to the discussion, yes.
That's an interesting question. Well, I guess just the mere fact that it exists adds to the discussion. When I was first starting out, I was really kind of nervous about the decision to get into this line of work because I didn't see too many representations of myself out there, either behind the scenes or the work like actually on the screen or on the page as much as I would have liked. And I felt great trepidation about entering this field because I wondered, would there be a place for me? Would there be those willing to kind of allow me into this fair to practice this work? And I took the chance because I didn't really feel like I had a choice. It was in me to do. And I just feel I felt like just getting my face out there and getting my name out there would be empowering to the next generation so that they would see that there's actually somebody out there actually doing the work. And empowering to myself just to know that it was, that I'd had this vision, that I was able to kind of see it through to completion. So I kind of feel like just the mere fact that all of us here exist and are actually doing our work and have found an avenue and an outlet for its existence validates the work's existence and proves that representation is possible and that it's necessary. So I'm very grateful that I've actually kind of got my work out there to be part of the discussion and hopefully to empower those coming up behind me.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Janice, how about you?
Yes, first of all, I think the conversation of representation is hugely important, and I'm happy to see media continue to shift towards greater representation, especially for Black folk. Super exciting to see like Denzel playing Macbeth. Oh, love it. Perfect. I want to see Viola Davis playing King George next. Like, let's keep it going. And I think the way that my work tackles representation is that being both a queer and Black person, I think that a lot of queer media centers whiteness. Still, I feel like it's slightly lagging behind. And so, like, one of the things I wanted to accomplish from the onset with I Am Gay is providing sort of framework for the coming out story within the Caribbean context, because that's something I had never seen before. So I wanted to represent my family's struggle and success navigating queerness and coming out, because I was hoping it would provide a framework for other people who are diverse in the same way, marginalized in the same way, to see and have an understanding of some sort of way forward. So I think that with that project, that's kind of where I wanted to go. And with all the work I want to do, I want to just continue to make various spaces safer and more approachable for queer people, for Black people, but specifically Black queer people, the audience I'm most interested in representing.
Thank you. Tyler.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to have representation in film. With myself, even just the work that I do surrounding mental health, I come from a Black community, and I remember being the first person to really openly talk about mental health and the impact that had on people, how it helped people seek help, it helped people talk about their feelings. And I really just keep that same thought when I go into film projects. It's like, oh, if I have a character, I want Black youth to be able to look at that character and say, oh, I can be like that person, or I'm not just the stereotype that is often portrayed in the media. I think it's really important for myself to show people that being Black isn't a monolith. We are all so different, and yeah, it's a beauty to all of us. And as much of diversity within the Black community that I can bring to the screen, the better, I think.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much more to add. I agree with everything that my colleagues have spoken to. I think maybe just two elements to sort of reflect on. One is that, yes, representation is important, but it's really just the first step, right? And when we're talking about representation, we're not just talking about representation in front of the camera, right? We're talking about in front, behind the team, and those who have the power to greenlight, right? To say yes to this story, no to that story. In fact, that may be the most important space where representation is needed. And it's not just any kind of representation, because sometimes, white supremacy is perpetuated by folks within our communities as well. So thinking about how do we include a checking and accountability around how representation continues, because it's not just about the numbers, right? And as we're saying, in order for us to be able to not seem like a monolith, all of the diversity of our communities need to be represented in the stories that we tell. And so for me, there are different levels of representation and process that I feel are really important. We can be represented, but how it was spoken to before, the complexity. How do we delve into the complexity and the gray areas when we tell our stories, so we don't fall into these stereotypes or even this idea of victimhood? How do we center resistance as well, and the stories of resistance and that can be told as well, and not fall into sometimes the tropes of victimhood? And for me, I really try to balance that in the practice, as well as when I'm thinking about the stories that are told, that I tell. Of course, acknowledging the systemic forces that exist, but looking at our own sort of ways of overcoming is not the right word, but of dealing with it and navigating it, that where we center our humanity. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing up this idea of stereotype and so on. And while I was thinking about this question, I was doing a sort of play on words, and there's representation and there's also misrepresentation. And I'm just wondering if any of you feel you want to address that, because in a lot of ways, I think we've all addressed the idea that you didn't see yourself represented. But underlying that is the fact, and then even the case when we were represented, we were misrepresented. So in a way, we are coming to sort of correct that sort of stereotypical perspective that is put out upon us. So just give me your thoughts. Hoche, any thought, any reaction to that comment, observation?
Well, yeah, I just kind of want to piggyback off of what Michelle said. I think this is where the power to greenlight really comes into play, because it's one thing to have a story about oneself greenlit, but is it the kind of story that one would want to have oneself represented by? I think when you're dealing with people who are in a position to put a story out there, who are outside the culture, sometimes they may be affected by certain stereotypes or biases, and they may feel that they're kind of doing something positive by putting a story out there, but it may be putting, unfair messages out there that us as members of the community may not want to have put out there specifically. So I think it's important for us to kind of be in those positions of power where we can say, like, this is the right kind of story that we want to have put out into the world to show who we actually are. So I just think it's really important to, as Michelle said, to get into a position where we can make those decisions, as opposed to having those decisions kind of imposed upon us.
Okay, Janice, anything to add to that?
No, I thought that was an extremely well put comment, and hopefully like seeing more movement towards marginalized people being put in positions of power, I think is such an exciting thing to happen, because we get to see the intricacies of like individual cultures, and like there's so many interesting facets of, let's say, Blackness, and the intraculturality is something worth exploring, but can't be explored if you don't know that it even exists. So getting to see intergenerational stories, or like regional stories still centered within Blackness, that is an exciting possibility that can only happen when we are elevated into a point where we can call the shots a little bit. So I'm fully on board.
Exactly.
Okay, Michelle, I'll skip you this time around, but I'll go to Tyler. Tyler, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said. I don't have too much to add. But yeah, misrepresentation, it does happen. And from my perspective, when it happens, I can see it right away. And I'm like, this is pretty terrible. Like if there are writers writing for a Black character, for instance, and I usually can tell that if it's a white writer writing for a Black character or something. And I really feel that needs to change. And we need a crew that's diverse, a production team that's diverse, not just the people on camera who are reading these lines written by somebody not from our culture.
Okay, so the theme of the panel is to talk about mental health. And so the question I'd like to pose at this stage is that this cumulative impact over time, over generations, do you think that there is a link showing that representation in film and television? Do you see a connection between that and potentially someone's mental health?
Um,
Personal experience. Okay, Hoche, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I don't have very much expertise in this, but it just strikes me just as, as an individual going through life, if you don't see any, if you don't, I mean, our culture is saturated in pop culture. We're a storytelling society. And that's how we learn morality. That's how we entertain ourselves. That's how this is how we learn to get along in life, and through storytelling. And if one never sees themselves or a version of themselves on screen, on a page, it just seems, just logic suggests to me that would kind of throw up some mental upheaval in one's life. I think just getting a sense that seeing that you exist in the world, that other people see you, and other people kind of respect you enough to like want to tell your story, and give you a few minutes at the table to say your piece. I think would be just tremendously, it's just something that I think just human beings need, just it's a fundamental need, I think, that we have that needs to be represented. So it seems to me that if we don't see any representations of ourselves, there's going to be some mental issues involved down the road.
Tyler, anything else to add? If not, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it can be harmful for our community to not see representation, because or just for us to see one example of representation, like the stereotype. Or growing up, I just, speaking for myself, I remember like I played hockey growing up, and so I was usually the only Black person on the team, and I found myself in positions where a lot of my teammates sort of thought that I would be like those characters on TV shows, or like certain rappers, or like the funny guy, the funny sidekick type of character, or the thug type of character. And when you're not these things, you start to question, like, yeah, what's going on here? It's the thought of like, oh, am I not Black enough? Or is it or is it just they have this very wrong idea of who I am? And it can get confusing, especially as a youth growing up, I feel. Yeah.
So I want to move now to
Well, can I just say something? I want to say something to this.
Michelle.
I think this goes both ways. Like, if we look at white supremacy as a pathology, an ideology and a pathology, I think it's Toni Morrison in this famous conversation with Charlie Rose says, "Why do you need me on my knees in order for you to feel better about yourself as white people?" So when we talk about mental health and what representation means, this representation that we're talking about, the diversity of our experiences, not only helps our community, but it certainly helps white community or white identifying communities as well, to better also be healthy themselves and not need to put other communities down in order to feel good about themselves, whether it's unconsciously or not. So I think it's really important for us to kind of flip the conversation a little bit. Yes, it's about my own mental health and my sense of self and my sense of my humanity, but it's also about the dominant culture's sense of humanity, because there is a toxic element to that leads to certain perceptions that are really not real, and that we're dealing with right now politically, right? On a political scale, in terms of these narratives that are being thrust at us, whether, I mean, I won't go into more details, but I really think it's important to think about mental health from this perspective, that it's not just about our communities, but it's also about the dominant culture's community, in order for us to really do better as a larger society.
Absolutely. Because I totally agree with that, and I think there's like some mental degradation it's got to be it's got to be burdensome for the dominant society to deal with that sense of the so-called sense of superiority. That's not doing their mental health any favors either. So I think these kind of a more equal representation is exactly what Michelle said. It's going to be mentally helpful for both sides of the equation, as opposed to just the one. Let them lose those shackles of supremacy. That's as much of a prison as it is for us in a way.
And I think from my perspective, I think, as a member of the Black community, we're aware of the stigma that comes with the use of the term mental health. And so there are people who have a legitimate reason to have a mental problem. We are not sure whether it comes from intergenerational trauma or whatever the situation is, but that does exist. So as a filmmaker, you want to put that story out there, and you're not contributing to the stigma, but you're educating the society at large. So Michelle, I want to raise this question with your film, which I saw, which told a story that is set in Haiti that a lot of people probably had no idea that story existed. And the reason I think I sort of related to your film is that there's all a representation of people of Haitian background that you don't see this aspect at all. What pressure does that put on you when you're trying to tell a story like that? Could you just elaborate on that?
Pressure. Okay, I don't know if I see it that way. I mean, I think, well, one, the thing is, a part of what I try to explore also in some of the work that I do is looking at anti-Blackness within our own communities, right? Within our own, people who share the same island. As far as I'm concerned, we're all Black on that island of different shades, right? With the exception of certain people who trace completely back to Europe. But this idea of even that the toxicity of that internalization has us, hating on each other within the same island, right? So for me, in some ways, this is not my first career. I've done other work before, other careers. I came to filmmaking really. In some ways, it was to heal myself, right? There's a process in the practice that is healing too, that's healing from my own sort of internalization of things. And through my exchanges with the participants in the film, through, trying to create more complicated storytelling has a healing aspect in the practice. And I really try to focus on that too, that it's really important, no matter what the outcome is and its impact. I mean, of course, it's important that it has sort of an impact, but that in the practice, there's also sort of this healing process too. I'm not sure if I answered your question. The pressure, I mean, there's always pressure, right? The question is, what do I do about that pressure and how do I work with that pressure? And for me, I really try to take it from this healing perspective, from this collaborative sort of engagement with the participants that I'm working with. And the other part of it is my own self acknowledging as the light-skinned Haitian Canadian that I am, working in the DR and Haiti. What does that mean in terms of the power dynamics that exist? And can we talk about it? And can we acknowledge it and see how to work through it through a process, again, that is healing, that may not show up in the film, but certainly stays with us. So I don't know if that sort of answers your question.
It certainly does. I mean, everybody would answer this question differently, but I just wanted to get your perspective. And along that same context, Janice, I want you to talk to us about whether making that film where you came out to your parents and the community to say, I am gay, what sort of impact? Did you go through some sort of healing process? Could you explain that to us?
To ensure the safety of all the participants, my family of the film, I kind of wanted to make sure that we were at least partially, to some satisfactory degree, that we were already healed. So as fresh as the conversations look on screen, and they're particularly fresh for my siblings, the person who I care most about and where there's the most friction, my mother, I had come out to her initially for the real first time a couple years ago. And so in the film, it's really a revisiting of the subject matter. But I think that was an important thing to do because it can, to put something on such a wide display, I think it was important to take the time to make sure that we're safe in these emotions, that we understand where we're both coming from, and be mature and understanding. And so for me, in creating my work, I want the healing aspect and the safety aspect to be the foremost thing that I approach, because that's why I'm making the piece. I'm making this piece because I want to give other young queer Caribbean people this evidence that healing is possible. And if I had that when I was growing up, it would have been so much easier for me, but I didn't. So I played it safe. It delivered this piece. And I think that resulted in an object that can potentially, and that seems to have had a healing effect on other people like me. So I hope that answers the question.
Certainly does. The fact that you've brought up the idea of informing other people in the community, I just want to take that as a jumping off point, because watching the program today, there are probably young Black filmmakers who are aspiring to become filmmakers so that they can tell their stories and become part of the narrative. I know everybody individually has made suggestions, but do you have any, because the other thing that I'm seeing here is that another part of the mental health that I know, going back to my time, when you were just trying to quote unquote become a filmmaker, to get into the business, there was so much rejection involved that you probably gave up. And so what would you say to that aspiring Black filmmaker who's watching this program today and you want to inspire them? Tyler, do you have any words of wisdom based on your experiences that you'll tell that young person? I know you have your personal story, you can mention that, how you got involved, but people watching and listening definitely would be inspired to hear something for you, from all of you.
Definitely for myself, it's been, I think with me, I just have been really persistent, and there have been times where I felt not good enough. There have been times where I thought, why am I even trying to do this? Am I going to make it to the places I want to make it? And I think a good part of my culture is that my roots, I think about them. I think about the people that came before me and how resilient they all were and how strong they were. And I pulled that. It comes from somewhere. It's somewhere. It's an energy that I feel, but it's there and it helps me keep going. And no matter how many doors shut, it's like, okay, I'm going to go back and figure out how to get in this door the next time. I'm going to create my own door, or I'm always going to have to try and find a way. And I would say that to emerging younger film directors, just don't give up and just keep going. Make it, if they are, I tell people this, like, if people are not looking at me or they're not listening to me, I make it so it's impossible for them not to. I just keep going and going and going. And it can be hard at times. So knowing when to rest and knowing when to take care of yourself, but also knowing that you can get right back to it, and you're worth it.
Thank you, Tyler. And for those of you out there, if you have any questions for us, you can send us your question on the chat line on YouTube. Okay, so I'll continue. Hoche, any advice for some of the young aspiring Black filmmakers out there?
I mean, Tyler kind of said it all, to be honest. Like, don't give up, just keep working. And the thing is, I always feel weird giving this type of advice to people, because I always feel like if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. You don't really need anybody's advice You know, if you're going to do it, you're going to keep going. People tell you can't do it, you're going to keep going. People tell you you're not good enough, you're going to keep going. So I sort of feel like if it's within you to do it, you're going to find a way to do it. But just to piggyback off what Tyler said, just never surrender. Keep working. Because you will get those people who are going to say you're not good enough and that you shouldn't be doing it. The other thing about filmmaking is I don't think that school is necessarily the right path for all of the arts. I think you can, you know, there's a lot of fantastic autodidacts out there. But I think there's a real advantage, specifically with filmmaking, to go to school, if only because that'll put you in an environment where your filmmaking is so collaborative and it's so based on hardware. Going to film school will put you in an environment where you're surrounded by collaborators. When I was in film school, I made sure, in addition to the work I was doing for myself, that I got involved with all of my friends' projects. All right. I was shooting stuff for other people. I was editing stuff for other people. I was acting for other people, in addition to the stuff that I was writing and directing, you know, self-generated. So I think, and that also gave me a fantastic access to just tons of equipment and other people who wanted to do what I was doing. So I would say for anybody aspiring, especially with filmmaking, school is like one of the best places you can go to, just because of the talent pool and the hardware pool around you. So yeah, but never surrender. That's the main advice. Just keep working, man.
Thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, as someone who did not go to film school, but who's taught film school, I definitely see the advantages of that. I just want to extend a little bit this idea of building on our ancestors and working. But for me, I think about, okay, how did I get to where I'm getting and I don't think I could have done it without community, right? And the community is however I define it. It can be the community of peers, where we're going up together, and Hoche's mentioned that a little bit in terms of finding the collaborators that we can build together and also vent together, because that venting is really important. So you know you're not alone and you're not talking to, you know, the mirror, but that it's validating your experience. And it is so, so important to have that sense of community. It doesn't necessarily have to be a film community, as long as you have a group of folks who have your back, or who understand you, who you can vent with, that will give you that energy to keep being perseverant, you know. And, you know, sometimes it can't be your mom or dad or brother or sister. It's kind of had to be outside of that circle. Sometimes, at least for me, it was. And, you know, it's interesting. I go back and forth around this idea of mentorship, right? I have some mentors who were really key for me. I don't even know if they realized they were mentors at the time, but for me, especially in terms of taking a direction, either political or otherwise, that sort of felt me validate the direction I was taking when I knew that others kind of like were in disagreement, sort of. So think about mentorship also, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily somebody who takes on that role, right? Because that is also a burden. I've been mentor and I've been a mentee, and there is that extra burden as a mentor to be the only person giving advice in that kind of sense. And there's a dynamic there that can be draining too, because it's and feeling that responsibility also. But I think that's subject for that's a different panel discussion. But this idea of even having references, you know, references of people who've kind of been there, done that, or people you listen to, like, and for me, I find it in literature, I find it in theater, I find it in academia, not just in film. And I feel that those serve as inspirations for me. So, yeah.
Very well put. And I think I had one of the questions, one of the topics I wanted to bring up is the idea of community support and networking. And I can tell you from my perspective, I started making film in Edmonton in the late 70s, early 80s. And for a long time, I never saw another person like me. And I wish I would have had just one person that I could bounce the story of. and get some feedback and some input. And I remember in the late 80s, I went to the Toronto International Film Festival, my second film, and I ran into the Black Film and Video Network. And it was the best thing that happened to me. I felt as though I was part of a group. And since that time, even though I have worked primarily in the West, when I joined the film board, my job was actually to look for filmmakers of color, and I'd have these outreach. And it was very, very important because you sit there, you make the story, but you're not getting that sort of feedback from your community, the way how you have described it. So what role, Janice, in your particular case, what role does community play or might have played or should have played? Anyway, you want to answer that question because you're a first-time filmmaker. Where did you get that support that you needed?
Oh, community was pretty much the whole thing. Like that is almost the be all and end all. Yeah, for me to, I am gay, very concretely with the NFB, that I wouldn't have been able to make that kind of piece without Leah Marin and Allison Duke being my director, mentor, producer, and producer. Leah Marin was the producer, Allison Duke were the director, mentor, and they guided me throughout the whole thing. Imagine if I was a little film baby trying to tackle this very difficult conversation with just surrounded by a sea of white people. No, that would be so uncomfortable. Oh my God. And sorry, NFB, y'all are very nice, but it would be weird. You got the right people. You got the right people. And that was the basis of the community that I started to build working in the film industry. And then the rest of my narrative from there, I got to work with Oya Media, which is Allison Duke's like Black youth filmmaking program, kind of like a film school, but it's free and it's specifically for young Black people. And through that, I got to create a network of not only established Black filmmakers in the Toronto scene, but also the young Black filmmakers in the scene. And we got to create a piece of Black-centered art with a Black crew coming up. So like community literally gave me this amazing breadth of experiences and in that positive, healthy way I want to see out of the industry, which couldn't have happened in the absence of these amazing people. So besides community being extremely important, which is one takeaway, the second takeaway is check out Oya Media if you're a young Black filmmaker, because that might be your entryway if you're a first timer. Yeah.
Seeing that you mentioned community in that light, there's this aspect of our community, and I think I experienced that in my early days, that when a Black filmmaker makes a film on a certain topic and presents it to the Black community, he or she is almost put in a position where they are perceived to be the expert on that particular topic. And that's a very, very difficult position to be in. How do you guys deal with that? Do you have any advice? Excuse me. Do you have any advice or discussion? I can give you one while we're waiting to think about it. In 1991, I made a film called Carol's Mirror. And it was an innovative program at the National Film Board to introduce anti-racism education to the to the elementary and junior high schools. And so I had this writer and we came up with the idea of let's do a film called Carol's Mirror. It's about a Black girl who wanted to be Snow White in the school's play. And again, it brings up the trauma that we have is that she was never given the opportunity to play any part but an evil part, right? Because she was the only Black person and so she had to be the bad guy. And so I showed that film during Black History Month. And the end, this parent came up to me almost in tears and said, Mr. Jacob, this is happening to my daughter and she doesn't want to go to school. You know what, can you help me? And I've always remembered that even though I had a background in education, but my role there wasn't as an educator or a teacher, I was there just to show the film. And so our role sometimes is not only showing the film, but we have to answer the questions that the subject and the community then throws back at us, How do you cope with that? Michelle, can you start on that topic? Is that something you're faced with?
Well, yes. I mean, yes. In the previous feature I did called American Promise, where it was a 13-year longitudinal film looking at Black male education here in New York City. And it was 13 years that we spent shooting. And it was actually my son, my family, and his best friend in this elite private school. And I don't know if I would call it experts, but we had a huge community engagement campaign with parents, with schools, with educators, and with the other young men in similar situations as my son and the other young man in the film. And I think for me, what is really powerful is the idea of seeing my own lived experience being reflected on film, right? And so in making the story, I become a reference and I think I spoke about it a little bit earlier, that validates a lived experience. So it's less about being an expert than about sharing the validated experience that we know is happening, and then seeing it on screen, and provoking conversation. So it's not necessarily that I have an answer, but this lived experience that is on the screen is a shared one. And I can maybe help guide to places where there can be answers, right? And so I try to avoid that kind of expert idea, but this idea that narrative and storytelling is so good at is really validating a shared experience. And in some ways, I think it was Ralph Ellison who spoke about, it's in the very specific. The very specificity, we talk about how, if it's a story about this community, it's not going to be relevant to larger. But no, the more specific, the more human the story, the more universal it becomes and is relatable to others. So I think it's that relatability that we grab onto and then try to engage in conversation that can maybe lead to transformation. But this expert, if I spend too much time thinking about expert, I lose the importance of what storytelling is and what's at the crux of it. So I'm not sure if I'm answering that question, but I try to see it in terms of value, because the first audience for me is me, right? I see myself in the story, and I know that there are others who will see themselves too, because I'm part of a larger community, and that's where the power is. Right. And then we can take it from there. But for example, for this particular film, it's not that we had answers. We had an experience that was seen as invisible, that became validated. And we actually wrote a book that led to other answers that people could share within that book. So I do think it's important to think about community engagement. And I think the NFB is certainly involved in that around curricular, additional curriculum that can help. We've done that with Stateless as well. So it's really about being faithful to the craft as a filmmaker storyteller, where that power is there, so that there's meat then for those who are the experts to take it and unpack it so that they can have moments of conversation, which is what is exciting, I think, and that organizations like NFB sort of invest in.
Okay, I just want to come back now to where the nature of the work is such that you might find yourself experiencing emotional fatigue. I think you sort of alluded to that, not maybe in those terms, but I'm just wondering, just because of the work we are trying to do you find yourself becoming a victim of the stories that you're telling, or the trauma that you're representing on the screen? Do you ever get to that point where you feel you can't handle it anymore, you need to step away and take a breather, something like that? Am I clear with what I'm trying to get at here? The stories are so emotionally impactful that sometimes it begins to take a toll on you as a filmmaker, the storyteller. Do you have any advice, or how do you cope with that? How do you cope with that?
I had that experience once on a project I was working on. Not as a filmmaker, my work as a cartoonist. I was working on a biography of Martin Luther King, and it came time to getting to the assassination. And I was prevaricating on how I was actually going to portray this assassination. And at first it was going to be extremely graphic, and eventually I decided to go with a kind of a more impressionistic interpretation of the events. But in the whole lead up to it, I started to really feel just this sense of melancholy and doom that pervaded the events, you know, and it did start to, and I noticed I was feeling a lot more emotional. There was a lot more kind of trepidation about approaching the material as I was getting closer to those parts of the story. I don't have any advice on how to deal with that type of thing. I think that's just kind of a hazard of the work that we do. And I think it's kind of up to the individual as to how to address it. For me, I just powered through it. I had a deadline I had to meet, so that meant the work had to get done. So, you know, at the end of the day, I would sort of take a few minutes and regroup. But the next day, I had no choice. I had to get back to it. So I probably could have handled that an emotional level a little bit better. I probably should have taken a little bit more time away from the material just to let it sink in a bit and let some of the emotions pass. But I was sort of forced by circumstance to, even though I kind of wanted to take a step back, I had no choice. So I don't have any advice for anybody on how to deal with that, but I except to say, be aware that that can definitely be a hazard of the work that we're doing, and maybe something to take steps to prevent before you go into it.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Tyler, from your perspective?
Yeah, for myself, I've definitely dealt with some burnout from working on different projects. Especially, I've two short films I did in the past. They were really personal for me, and they were about my mental health, and I had to revisit some traumatic times in my life. What I did during that was really just push through it and think of it sort of as this like this healing process, this hard healing process. And I also don't really have many answers to dealing with that for myself, though. Now I feel that I'm better with it. I definitely make sure that I take time away and do things like meditate. I have a reminder on my phone every day to just turn off my Wi-Fi, to not be on any screens at a certain point. Because especially also when you're so like passionate about the topic and it means so much to you, you can just drown in it and you can make it your entire life. And I've done that in the past, and I'm trying my best to not do that now, to like have a life outside of those projects. Yeah.
Well, I think we are pretty close to running out of time, and I don't have the opportunity to go back to all of you for some of the questions, but I think we've covered quite a lot of ground in this, the few minutes that have been allocated to us to talk on this very important topic. So I'll give you a few seconds if you have something that you're doing for Black History Month, any activity that you're involved in that you can just mention so that you want to let people know what you're up to. Michelle, can you just, a quick update where you're at with Black History Month?
I think this is actually the only event for me.
Okay.
But I am in production on a couple of projects, so I'm deep in that, you know, in that headspace right now. Not much public stuff going on this month.
Okay, Janice, where are you at?
Sure. I am doing a live performance. I do comedy. I'm gonna hope that it's good that day. February 18th at Comedy Bar for a show called The Ethnic Rainbow. This is run by a comedian named Brandon Nash Mohammed, and this is Canada's only queer BIPOC showcase show for comedy. So that's a little event if you have nothing to do on February 18th.
Oche.
I'm not really doing anything specific for Black History Month. This is kind of the highlight right here. But like Michelle, I'm also, well, I'm not in production or anything. I'm in development on feature film at the moment, having a lot of fun with that. I did a feature with the Talent to Watch program through Telefilm about 2 years ago, which was a horrible experience. And this one has been the flip side, working with some fantastic people. So having a lot of fun with that. And yeah, that's about it. Writing some other stuff, just working. My whole life right now is work. I got no life outside of my work at the moment, unfortunately.
Well, that's very good. Tyler.
Yeah, this is the only event I have to this month. And I know I just said that I'm trying my best to like take breaks and have a life outside of work, but honestly, I'm just working a lot.
We all do. And on my end, I'll tell you that this is one of 3 panels. On February 14th, I'll be talking to Black filmmakers at York University in the Black filmmaking program and the experience of being a Black filmmaker in Canada, along with Jennifer Holness and Sylvia Hamilton. So that should be an interesting panel. And then on the 15th, the next day, I'm on a panel talking about Black settlements in Canada, from Hogan's Alley in British Columbia to Amber Valley and Africville. So we've got a panel. And the interesting thing about this one, it's not to filmmakers, it's just a working group that decided to do something on Black History Month. And this is the panel they came up with. So I want to thank all of you for participating and contributing to this panel. It was very, very interesting, and I appreciate all of the perspectives you brought to the table with this topic. So thank you very much. Also, I'd like to thank the audience out there, the NFB, for organizing this. And then I have some call to action for the people out there at large. You can find all of the films that our panelists have made in collaboration with the NFB if you go to the NFB website, nfb.ca. And the second call to action, follow the NFB on Twitter and Facebook for details on other activities the organization is doing to celebrate Black filmmakers, their works, and their diverse communities across Canada. Once again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.